Phil Spencer immediately caught the internet's attention for all the wrong reasons with his recent quote. The Xbox figurehead mentioned in an interview with The Guardian, that I'm clearly paraphrasing by the way, that service-based multiplayer titles like Overwatch has a bigger impact over narrative-focused experiences like Zelda or Horizon Zero Dawn. He stated that while his current competition, Sony Computer Entertainment, can deliver hard-hitting AAA exclusives, these kind of quality offerings are a bit of a rarity in the modern era elsewhere, and there's these games that could literally cause infighting to get a foothold in the gaming industry. Too long didn't read. There's disagreements in the boardroom over a game's funding, and that multiplayer games are the rave nowadays. I personally find his statement partially agreeable and disagreeable, and here's why. Yes, Phil Spencer is correct on the fact that publisher and developer relations do not always have the same philosophy. A developer just wants to see their game created and finalized and have their dream realized for all the world to see. A publisher, on the other hand, can have one clear, short-sighted goal in mind that has affected many games in the past.
We've got to have money.
We've seen what happened with Dead Space 3, the pet project of Visceral Games, all because EA did what they thought was hip and trendy, and it reflected in the sales because Dead Space 3 failed to meet sales expectations, all due to publisher interference and the forced additions of tacked-on co-op. Why this situation is relevant is because it segues into the fact that EA tried to force something into the game to enhance the replay value, to force in co-op and multiplayer to some extent in Dead Space 2. While multiplayer and co-op is nice in my opinion, there's always a percentage out there that probably doesn't care about multiplayer or online games in general, and you have to consider that factor as well. Also, multiplayer-only games will not go over well with everyone. Overwatch might be the most popular thing out there now, but there's a reason why so many people do get upset over online-only services, subscriptions, and always online games, because you have to consider the fact that everyone might not have the best internet to run it. I think it's also safe to say that we're at that point nowadays where a developer will give you a blanket excuse as to why a game doesn't have a certain amount of content instead of trying. They could at least try to put a single player in something that seems that it could have a single player focus. There's no excuse for a game having all these great mechanics and having a good online, but they can't focus on a good single player in tandem. I think that's just an excuse. I don't think that multiplayer is needed in all games because, let's be honest, if your focus is to make a great game and a great story, you will focus on the single player content. But when it comes to multiplayer co-op stuff, if the dynamics are in play, if it's really fun, it never hurts to experiment. There are exceptions to the rule when the developer makes a statement of saying that they want their game to be at the most highest quality possible, so it might have to get delayed, it might need time, we might have to cut out a feature, but overall, the game has to be worthwhile in terms of replay value for the hardcore gamer who wants more bang for their buck. The casuals, they probably don't care about this, thus they will play stuff that is pretty much the equivalent of popcorn fun, and then they'll drop it after a day or so because they have to move on to the next title. Philly boy, you motherfucker, I'm trying to help you out because I think that is one of the reasons why Overwatch is so popular, is because it's so easy to pick up and play. Outside of Sony's first party AAA bombshells, a lot of other studios, sometimes their games do well and sometimes their games do poorly. Like I said, it's all very wishy-washy with how these things work, because what's popular to someone else might not catch on to the next gamer, and thus that's a game not sold. Sometimes it's really important to just get your game out there, market, advertise, do everything in your power to make sure it's good, but sometimes even really good games, they just don't do well compared to how games were back then on the PS1 and the PS2, where all these games that came out, they were just successful because this was during the golden age where a lot of rare and interesting titles came out, and we don't get that anymore. We get like a rare release that's really good once in a blue moon, but we don't get it consistently like we used to, and I can see that point to an extent. I mean, whether you love it or you hate it, game development has grown to be a lot more expensive. So that's why the indie scene is really booming, because they really don't have to use a lot of money for some indie games. But AAA games in particular are very expensive to make. And for some of these companies, it's a risk to take. Is that game really worth the effort and blood, sweat, and tears poured into it, and you just really don't get anything left back on it? And that's what the publishers are really thinking at the end of the day, whether you love it or you hate it. Phil is just wrong in the fact that single player only games aren't leaving a significant impact. I don't know about that, man. I'm sure that The Last of Us tugged on some heartstrings at the time it came out. With all those philosophies in mind, I don't think that single player is going anywhere anytime soon. There's a lot of people out there as well that love a good story. They love good story-based content that pushes the envelope. Single player has always been a focal point in literally every gaming generation. On its own merit, Horizon Zero Dawn sold 2.6 million and is probably one of the most talked about Sony exclusives this generation, when so many people doubted Guerrilla Games because the Killzone series had so many bumps and bruises along the way. You have to consider the fact that, in conclusion, the sales of a title can be anyone's ballpark. I've seen underrated games that didn't sell well. I've seen overrated games that sold millions. I've seen vice versa, and I've seen games that just sold okay in that regard. We don't know when the next big hit or sales flop is going to happen, but maybe Phil Spencer needs a divine intervention, because he needs to know that he probably does need something like an exclusive Overwatch, Horizon Zero Dawn, or Zelda to be a saving grace on his own platform, because personally, the Xbox One lacks variety. Luckily, in all the clarifications following Phil Spencer's interview while he's on trial here, at least he played some of these games, and he's not a definitive fanatical drone, unlike some people in the Xbox community. Oh boy.
Fuck yourself.